The air shifted the moment I stepped through the ethereal gate. It grew heavy, cold, and smelled of damp earth and something ancient, like dust from a forgotten tomb. Before me lay the land of Nightreign, a realm held in the perpetual grip of a colossal silver moon. Its light wasn't gentle or romantic. It was sharp and clinical, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. I drew my claymore, its familiar weight a small comfort in this unnerving new place. The challenge I had set for myself felt impossibly heavy now. One life, no mistakes. The thought alone was a stone in my stomach, a constant nagging pressure that demanded absolute perfection from here on out. My journey began on a crumbling stone path flanked by skeletal trees whose branches clawed at the violet sky. The silence here was different from the quiet of the lands between. It wasn't empty, it was watchful. I could feel unseen eyes tracking my every move from the deep, inky woods that bordered the path. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of some nocturnal creature sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept my shield raised, my head on a swivel, my senses straining to catch any sign of an ambush. This was the first test patience. Rushing forward would be a fatal error, a rookie mistake I could not afford to make. The moon watched me, its impassive face a constant reminder of the stakes. The landscape was tragically beautiful, a masterclass in Gothic horror. Ruined chapels slumped against hillsides, their stained glass windows shattered and dark. Gravestones, ancient and leaning, dotted the fields like crooked teeth. The moonlight painted everything in shades of silver, blue, and black, making the world feel like a dream, or more accurately, a nightmare from which I might not wake. I had to focus on the details, the subtle clues in the environment. A disturbed patch of grass, a scuff mark on the stone, a glint of metal in the shadows. These were the things that would keep me alive. My mind raced, cataloging every potential threat, every possible escape route. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive quiet. This was the core of the challenge, the true test of a deathless run. It wasn't just about skill with a sword or the timing of a spell. It was about managing this fear, this constant gnawing anxiety that threatened to cloud my judgment. I took a deep, steadying breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. I had trained for this. I had studied the movements of countless foes, memorized incantations, and honed my reflexes until they were second nature. But here, in this alien land, all that preparation felt fragile. All it would take was one misstep, one moment of panic, and it would all be for nothing. The journey had just begun. Venturing off the main path, I pushed my way into the gloomwood. The canopy of interlocking branches was so thick that the moonlight struggled to pierce it, creating a disorienting mosaic of light and profound darkness. The air grew even colder, thick with the scent of pine and decay. Strange phosphorescent fungi pulsed with a soft, eerie light, casting shifting patterns on the forest floor. These glowing mushrooms were my only reliable guides, leading me deeper into the woods. I moved slowly, my boots sinking into the soft, damp soil with a faint squelch. The sounds were muted here, swallowed by the dense foliage, which only made the sudden snap of a twig nearby sound like a thunderclap. I could hear them before I saw them. Faint, guttural whispers seemed to slither through the trees, just at the edge of my hearing. They were indecipherable, a maddening chorus of sibilant sounds that seemed to come from all directions at once. I tightened my grip on my shield, its familiar weight a small anchor in this sea of suspense. The whispers were a psychological weapon, designed to unnerve and distract. I forced myself to ignore them, to focus on the tangible threats I knew must be lurking nearby. My eyes darted between the glowing fungi, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The tension was a physical thing, a knot tightening in my chest with every step I took. Then I saw one, a gloomwood stalker. It was a wretched, hunched creature, its skin the color of bruised plums and its limbs unnaturally long and spindly. It clung to the side of a massive tree, its large black eyes fixed on me. The creature was perfectly camouflaged in the dappled darkness, and I realized with a jolt that I had likely walked past several others already. It didn't move. It just watched, its head cocked to one side. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I knew this was a trap. It wanted me to charge, to make a rash move. Instead, I held my ground, my sword held at the ready, my body coiled like a spring. We were locked in a silent standoff, a battle of nerves in the heart of the haunted woods. My mind worked quickly, assessing the situation. There was one that I could see, but the whispers suggested more. They were pack hunters. An attack on one would surely bring the others swarming from the shadows. I needed a plan, a way to control the engagement. I spotted a narrow clearing just ahead, a small pool of moonlight that offered better visibility. It was a risk to move, but staying here, surrounded and blind, was a greater one. Taking a slow, deliberate step backward, I began my retreat toward the clearing. The stalker's eyes followed me, unblinking. The whispers swirled around me, a venomous, mocking symphony. The first real fight was coming. I just had to make sure it happened on my terms. The moment my boot touched the edge of the moonlit clearing, the forest erupted. The stalker I had been watching shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and launched itself from the tree. Simultaneously, 3 more figures detached themselves from the surrounding darkness, their spindly limbs carrying them across the ground with terrifying speed. There was no more time for strategy, only reaction. I planted my feet, raised my shield, and braced for impact. The first stalker crashed against it with a sickening thud, its claws screeching against the reinforced steel. The force of the blow staggered me, but I held firm, the lessons from 1,000 battles guiding my body. My counterattack was swift and decisive. I shoved with my shield to create a sliver of space, then brought my claymore around in a wide, horizontal arc. The heavy blade connected with the creature's torso, cleaving through its thin frame with a wet crunch. It collapsed in a heap, but there was no time for relief. The other 3 were already on me, their movements chaotic and unpredictable. One lunged low while another leaped from the side. I dodged the low attack, the creature's claws swiping through the air where my legs had been a second before. I parried the second attack, the clang of steel on claw ringing through the night. It was a frantic dance, a whirlwind of desperate dodges and calculated strikes. My focus narrowed until the world consisted of only me and my 3 assailants. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was moving on pure instinct. I cast a quick glintstone pebble, the shard of blue magic striking one of the stalkers in the chest and causing it to stumble back. This gave me the opening I needed. I lunged forward, thrusting my claymore deep into the creature's core. As I pulled the blade free, the third and final stalker leaped onto my back, its claws digging into my shoulders. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot through me. For a terrifying second, I thought this was it, the end of the run, the failure. The thought itself was more painful than the creature's claws. But failure was not an option. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled rage, I threw myself backward, slamming the creature against a thick tree trunk. It shrieked and its grip loosened just enough for me to spin around and face it. Its black eyes were wide with a feral madness. It lashed out with its claws, but I was ready. I ducked under the wild swing and drove my sword upward in a powerful finishing blow. Silence descended upon the clearing once more, broken only by my own ragged breathing. I stood there for a long moment, my body trembling, the pain in my shoulders a dull throb. I was alive. I had survived. The relief was so overwhelming it almost brought me to my knees. After the chaos of the fight, I retreated to a small, secluded cave I had spotted earlier, tucked behind a waterfall of shimmering moonbeams. The entrance was partially hidden by thick, hanging moss, offering a defensible position and a much-needed sense of security. Inside, the air was still and dry. I carefully unsealed my flask of crimson tears, taking a small, measured sip. The warm, golden magic flowed through me, knitting the torn flesh on my shoulders and easing the fiery pain. I watched my health bar fill on the periphery of my vision, a simple mechanic that felt like a profound act of healing. Each sip was a precious resource, a buffer against the finality of death that I could not afford to waste. I sat down on the cold stone floor, my back against the cave wall, and allowed myself a moment to simply breathe. The adrenaline from the battle slowly subsided, leaving behind a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion. I closed my eyes, but the images of the fight remained, seared onto the back of my eyelids. The glint of claws, the speed of the attack, the feeling of my sword connecting with flesh. This was the mental toll of a deathless challenge. Every encounter, no matter how small, felt like a final exam. The pressure was immense, a constant companion that whispered doubts into my ear. Could I keep this up? Could I maintain this level of focus for the entire journey through Nightreign? To distract myself, I began to organize my inventory. It was a mundane task, but its familiarity was comforting. I sorted through my collected runes, checked the durability of my equipment, and reviewed the incantations I had prepared. Each item told a story, a memory of a past victory or a lesson learned. My claymore, a simple but reliable weapon that had seen me through countless trials. My Carrion Knight's shield, a bulwark against the darkness. These were not just tools, they were partners in my survival. This ritual of preparation helped to ground me, to pull my mind away from the precipice of anxiety and back to the practical realities of the task ahead. As I worked, my eyes fell upon a series of faint carvings on the cave wall. They were crude, clearly etched by someone in a hurry. The carvings depicted the giant moon that dominated the sky, but with a horrifying addition, a massive tentacled creature seemed to be coiled around it, its form blending with the craters and shadows of the lunar surface. Below it were figures of people, kneeling not in worship, but in terror, a piece of lore, a fragment of the story of this cursed land. It seemed Nightrein's madness stemmed from the very sky above. The discovery sent a new chill down my spine, but it also hardened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my own survival anymore, I was fighting to understand and perhaps even defy the source of this endless night. Leaving the relative safety of the Gloomwood, I found myself before my next great obstacle, the Cathedral of Lunar Scorn. It was a colossal structure of pale, almost luminous stone that clawed at the sky, its spires like the skeletal fingers of a forgotten god. The architecture was a perversion of the divine, filled with sharp angles, leering gargoyles, and windows that looked like weeping eyes. A palpable aura of despair radiated from its walls, a chilling cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. This place was sick, corrupted to its very foundations by the same malevolent energy I had seen depicted in the cave. I knew a great power resided within, and it would not welcome my intrusion. The main doors were sealed shut, forcing me to find an alternate route. I circled the perimeter, my shield held high, wary of the silent robed figures that stood like statues in the cathedral's courtyard. They were moon gazers, their heads tilted back at an unnatural angle, their faces hidden by deep hoods as they stared eternally at the overwhelming moon. I gave them a wide berth, sensing that they were far from harmless. I eventually found a breach in the wall, a collapsed section of masonry that led into the cathedral's darkened narthex. The air inside was stale and thick, with the cloying scent of incense and something metallic, like old blood. The interior was a breathtaking vision of desecrated grandeur. Moonlight streamed through the shattered remains of a gigantic rose window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like lost souls. The pews were overturned and splintered, and the grand altar at the far end of the nave was draped in black cloth, upon which strange silvery runes pulsed with a faint light. The silence here was even more profound than in the forest, a heavy, sacred stillness that felt deeply wrong. Every footstep I took echoed through the cavernous space, a loud pronouncement of my trespass. I felt like a blasphemer, a heretic in a church dedicated to an evil god. My goal was the central bell tower, which I suspected held the key to progressing further. But the path was not clear. As I moved deeper into the nave, the moon gazers from the courtyard began to stir. They didn't walk, they glided across the stone floor, their movements silent and unnerving. Their heads remained tilted back, but I could feel their collective awareness lock onto me. They began to chant, a low, monotonous hum that vibrated through the stone and into my bones. The air crackled with energy. I knew this was the prelude to an attack. I had to reach the tower, and I had to do it before their lunar sorcery overwhelmed me completely. The real trial of the cathedral was about to begin. As I ascended the winding staircase of the bell tower, a figure blocked my path. He was a knight, clad in ornate silver armor that seemed to drink in the moonlight, making him glow with an ethereal luminescence. His helmet was fashioned in the shape of a stoic, sorrowful face, and in his hands he held a great sword that shimmered with cosmic energy. This was Knight Commander Valerius. The plaque at the tower's base had named him. He stood as still as a statue, a silent, imposing sentinel. There was no malice in his posture, only a profound sense of duty. He was a guardian, and I was an intruder he could not allow to pass. He was the boss of this domain. He moved without a word. His first attack was not a wild swing, but a graceful, sweeping arc, his greatsword trailing stardust. I rolled under the blow, the wind from the massive blade whispering past my ear. The sheer power behind the swing made the stone walls tremble. I immediately understood that a direct block with my shield was out of the question. He would shatter my guard and leave me vulnerable. This fight would have to be one of agility and timing, a deadly ballet where a single misstep would mean my end. He flowed from one attack into the next with a liquid grace that belied his heavy armor, a true master of the sword. My own attacks felt clumsy and slow in comparison. I looked for openings, for the briefest pause in his relentless assault. I dodged a powerful downward slash that cracked the stone floor where I had been standing, and used the recovery time to land a quick strike on his leg. The claymore bounced off his enchanted armor with a loud clang, doing minimal damage. This was a battle of attrition. I couldn't outmuscle him. I had to outlast him. I began to use my magic more, casting swift glintstone darts to disrupt his rhythm, to force him to react to me instead of the other way around. It was a risky strategy, as casting left me open, but it was my only hope. The fight raged on, a symphony of clashing steel and crackling magic under the light of the giant moon. We were two warriors locked in a fatal dance, each dedicated to our purpose. I could feel his sorrow, his unending vigil. He wasn't a monster, he was a prisoner of his duty, bound to this tower for eternity. But sympathy was a luxury I could not afford. As he prepared for another devastating combo, I saw my chance. He raised his sword high for an overhead slam, a move that was powerful but slow. I didn't dodge. I charged forward, channeling all my energy into a single, desperate thrust. My claymore, glowing with the magic of a carrion grandeur spell, slammed into a small gap in his armor at the neck. The moment my blade found its mark, Valerius froze. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, a pulse of silver energy erupted from the wound, throwing me backward. I landed hard, the wind knocked out of me, my vision swimming. My health was perilously low. Just a sliver of red remained. A single touch, a fall, anything would have ended it. I watched, gasping for air, as the Knight Commander staggered. He didn't fall. Instead, he entered his second phase. The sorrowful mask of his helmet cracked and raw lunar energy poured from the fissures, his eyes glowing with a terrifying new intensity. The fight wasn't over. It had just become infinitely more dangerous. His movements were faster now, more erratic and desperate. He abandoned his graceful swordsmanship for raw, explosive power. He teleported across the bell tower in flashes of silver light, appearing behind me for a surprise attack that I barely managed to roll away from. His greatsword was now fully engulfed in cosmic flames, and each swing unleashed waves of energy that I had to leap over. This was it, the true test. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I drank the last of my crimson tears, the healing warmth, a temporary reprieve from the brink of death. I had one chance. I had to make it count. I focused on his patterns, ignoring the spectacular and deadly light show. Every teleport was preceded by a specific sound cue. Every energy wave was telegraphed by the angle of his sword. I pushed aside the fear, the panic, the overwhelming urge to just run. My mind became a cold, calculating machine, processing data, predicting movements, and identifying the minuscule windows of opportunity. I dodged, I weaved, I waited. He was burning himself out, his power too great for his physical form to contain. Cracks began to spread across his armor, leaking more and more of the raw lunar energy. He was becoming unstable, a walking bomb of celestial rage. The opening came after his most devastating attack, a massive explosion of energy that shattered the great bell above us. He was momentarily still, kneeling on one knee, his body convulsing. This was my final chance. I poured every last bit of my stamina, every ounce of my will, into a final, desperate charge. I leaped into the air, bringing my claymore down in a two-handed vertical slash. The blade, still humming with residual magic, struck the top of his helmet. The impact was immense. The cracked helmet shattered completely, and Knight Commander Valerius, the sorrowful guardian, dissolved into a shower of stardust and fading moonlight, leaving only his greatsword behind. I had done it. I was alive. Silence. The ringing in my ears from the shattered bell slowly faded, replaced by a profound and absolute quiet. The only sound was the gentle whisper of the wind flowing through the now open bell tower. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my body trembling uncontrollably from the adrenaline crash. My legs felt weak, and I had to lean against the stone parapet to keep from collapsing. I looked down at my hands, still gripping the hilt of my claymore so tightly that my knuckles were white. The fight was over, the guardian was gone, the path was clear, but the victory felt hollow. tinged with the melancholy of Valerius's final moments. I walked over and picked up his weapon, the Moonlight greatsword. It felt cool to the touch, humming with a quiet, dormant power. It was not a trophy of conquest, but a memento of a fallen, honorable foe, a reminder of the solemn duty that had bound him to this place. Holding it, I felt a connection to the history of Nightreign, to the knights who had tried to fight back against the creeping madness of the moon. This sword was a legacy, and by defeating its wielder, I had, in a way, inherited his burden. The thought was sobering. This no-death run was becoming more than just a personal challenge. It was a pilgrimage through a land of sorrow. From the top of the tower, I had a panoramic view of Nightreign. I could see the gloomwood, a dark stain on the landscape, and the pale, skeletal spires of other, more distant ruins. The entire land was bathed in the unwavering, cold light of the moon. From this vantage point, I could see the scale of the corruption, the sheer size of the realm I still had to cross. The victory against Valerius was just one step, a single battle in a much larger war. The path ahead was long and undoubtedly filled with even greater horrors. The momentary elation of survival was quickly replaced by a daunting sense of perspective. But as I stood there, looking out over the cursed land, a new feeling began to take root alongside the fear and exhaustion determination. I had faced one of the land's greatest champions and emerged victorious. I had come within a hair's breadth of failure and had pulled myself back from the brink. The experience hadn't just tested my skills, it had forged them anew, hardening my resolve. I was not the same tarnished who had first stepped into Nightreign. I was stronger, more focused, and more aware of what it would take to see this through to the end. I had survived the night's madness so far, and I would survive whatever else it had to throw at me. As I prepared to descend from the tower, a strange phenomenon occurred. On the far eastern horizon, a faint, almost imperceptible line of color began to appear. It was a deep, bruised purple, slowly bleeding into a soft orange. It was the first sign of color I had seen in this world that wasn't born of silver moonlight or violent magic. It was a dawn, a real, genuine dawn trying to break through the perpetual twilight. The sight was so unexpected, so alien to this land, that it filled me with a profound sense of awe. It was a promise, however fragile, that the endless night was not truly endless. There was a cycle, a natural order that was still fighting to assert itself. This glimmer of hope changed my perspective on the journey. My no-death challenge had felt like a desperate scramble for survival in a world doomed to darkness. But now, it felt different. It felt like I was a part of that struggle, a small force pushing back against the oppressive night. My survival was not just for myself, but for the possibility of that dawn. Defeating Valerius had perhaps weakened the moon's hold just enough for the sun to make its presence known. The thought imbued my quest with a new, heavier sense of purpose. I was no longer just a visitor trying to conquer a challenge. I was an active participant in the fate of this world. With the Moonlight greatsword now strapped to my back alongside my claymore, I began the long walk down. My body ached and my mind was weary, but my spirit was resolute. The experience of the past night had changed me irrevocably. I had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, faced my own limitations, and emerged stronger. The fear was still there, a constant companion on my shoulder, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned to coexist with it, to use it as a tool to sharpen my senses and focus my will. The tarnished who left the cathedral was not the same one who had entered it. Standing once more at the base of the Cathedral of Lunar Scorn, I looked toward the faint promise of dawn. The road ahead was still shrouded in shadow, and I knew that the heart of Nightreign held terrors that would make Knight Commander Valerius seem like a mere foot soldier. But I was ready. I had survived my trial by moonlight, and now I would walk toward the dawn. My deathless night was not over, but for the first time, I could see the possibility of an end. Not just for my journey, but for the long, cursed night of this land. And so, with a deep breath of the cold morning air, I took my first step into the next chapter of my ordeal.